difficult thing, but I think you can see that God was preparing even a week or so ago by giving that vision and being able to see into the realm of the spirit and be able to see that symbolic nature of the clothes. So that then when I went to see and I saw the same thing, it just brings an added confirmation of what God was already preparing to show, you know. And I think, you know, when you do look at the cloud of witnesses and their role and how, you know, it's not an end, it's a new beginning. I think that's what I find the most comforting. I think I know there was a blog post that talked about the fact that, you know, there's only one church, and the heavenly church and the earthly church are united and are still have the same mandate and the same call to outwork the purposes of God and to fulfill restoration to the earth. And whether they are physically or spiritually involved, they're all involved. And you know, and they are very active in their involvement with us. You know, I think the more when we begin to be able to see into that realm more clearly, and you know, it's part of, I think, what God is wanting us to do is to be able to see into the realm of the spirit here and in around us, as well as engaging into the realms of heaven. You know, we can see that they're very actively involved. You know, and you get, of course, you get the negative side of it, where people will say, oh, well, you're talking to people who are dead and you're connecting up with dead people. They're not dead. They're alive. You know, they're eternal anyway. Their spirit is alive, and we're not talking with dead people. We're engaging with the cloud of witnesses who are living and active and are around us as a cloud. You know, and I think this is the key. You know, we are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. Jesus went back into heaven surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. He's coming back one day surrounded by a cloud of witnesses, and that cloud of witnesses is around the church because they actively are investing and trading into the fulfillment of their destinies in this generation as they pass the baton to us. I mean, our ministry, you know, I've engaged in the court of the upright a number of times, and you know, we were doing an exercise and we were just stepping into the realms of heaven as a group, and I found myself engaged in the court of the upright, and I saw 12 sort of men in white linen. They weren't all men, but they were there on thrones, and they had torches, flaming torches, and they had mantles. And you know, immediately I just knew who they were. You know, it's like I knew who the 12 were, and they have been assigned to us as a ministry specifically, so that they can help us because they associate with what we're doing. And so the sort of the apostolic and the administrative function of government, each of the 12 had a function in that, positively and sometimes negatively, in that they help us understand where they went wrong. That's Henry.
Henry!
Morning, Henry.
Henry seems to always try and get on the wrong call, or try and call us before we call him for some reason. I'll try and just give him a call, see if he can answer it. Yeah, I'll just send him that invite. Okay, so you know, and when I engaged with them, it was very clear that they had something to give, something to invest, something to help and encourage. And we were in again in a meeting one day, and we were engaging, and I sort of opened my eyes and look into the room, and I saw each one of those standing behind one person in the room, and I shared with them afterwards who it was standing behind them, and encouraged them to engage with those since, and many of them have. And each of them had insight and understanding into the nature of what our ministry is and how it relates to their ministry and how they can help us now with insight and understanding. But now they're free from sort of the restrictions that they had being in one time in one place. Now they're free from that. And so those cloud of witnesses can engage all over the place, which is an expansion of their ability while they were here. And you know, 2 days after Bob Jones's passing, he appeared in our meeting holding out a fiery scroll, offering that scroll, and several people went and engaged that. So it was quite interesting. And subsequently, we've engaged in several kingdom activities and found that that scroll has then been offered to us in a different way with the Court of Chancellors, and we've embraced that scroll and another similar scroll. And so they are very much active in helping us engage our destinies and look into the broader dimensions of the kingdom. You know, and I think on a personal level, you know, I've engaged personally with a number of men in white linen, right back from Adam through, you know, to Enoch and onwards. Jacob is a particular one that I engaged with, and that was a very enlightening, because he just told me to go and read a certain passage of his life, the passage of Bethel and the open heaven and the ladder going up from earth to heaven, and you know, it just, as I looked into it, it opened up a revelation about, you know, that now we are the house of God and the gateway of heaven, and I mean, really interesting, because he told me to do that, and then I re-engaged him, and he was digging a hole. You know, I mean, you get strange things. And he had a spade, shovel, and he was digging a hole. And I'm sort of, well, what are you doing? And he said, well, I'm digging a well. You know, and I'm like, okay. so, but it related to something, because then I thought, okay, I'm sure, reading the Old Testament scriptures about Jacob's life, I know Abraham dug wells, I know Isaac redug Abraham's wells and dug new wells, but I'm sure I never read anything about Jacob digging a well. And so I began to think about that and the implications of what the well meant, and then suddenly it just came to me, actually in the New Testament, the whole thing of the well of Sychar, where the Samaritan woman met Jesus, was Jacob's well.
Oh, yeah.
And therefore it was a revelation about those ancient wells are being redug, but there are new wells that are also being dug, and they're to bring salvation to people and to groups that have not yet received it. You know,
that's
awesome.
You
know, in that type of engagement, what I've learned is to look at the engagement and then go back and just meditate around it and look for the revelation that comes from it. You know, so I've had, you know, many engagement with the sort of men of white linen. I guess one of the most precious engagements really was one where I was walking with Jesus in heaven, and he took me to a place I'd never been before. It was like a dimensional place. It wasn't sort of anything I'd experienced or seen in the realms of heaven, but it was like a dimension. And when I went there was this huge area, and it looked like a huge playground, you know, and there were like just like millions and millions of children there. And you know, I was looking around, and it was just an amazing atmosphere, and there were loads of angels, and Jesus sort of just walked me up, and I walked up, and there were two children, probably about 5 and 7, I guess, in that would be my sort of guess at their ages, and they just looked at me. They were radiant, and they looked at me, and I knew who they were, and they knew who I was, and I found that it was they were my grandchildren. My daughter, my second daughter, had 2 miscarriages, very quickly. She had a pregnancy and a miscarriage, and then she got pregnant again very quickly a month later. So she never really sort of dealt with it. And then on her second pregnancy, she had twins, and one of the twins miscarried. So she carried on with the pregnancy, and I didn't really sort of think at the time. It was a very emotional thing, and I knew their names, their heavenly names, and I knew their characters, and everything was just so real, and they were growing at a different rate from what they would be on Earth, but still children. And I basically I sort of came out of this encounter and I shared it with my wife, and she said, well, that's really interesting, because the doctors they're trying to diagnose our daughter with postnatal depression, she's had a third child, and and so I thought, okay, well, this is really interesting. I'm sure this isn't coincidence, so I need to talk to her. So it's a bit strange you're talking. I sat her down. I said, look, this might sound really weird, really odd, but this is what I saw. And she sort of just began to sort of well up and got emotional. But I said, look, they are there in heaven. They haven't just disappeared. They're there. They have an eternal destiny which the angels are preparing them for. And I just felt, I said to her, look, you need to say goodbye to them, and you need to name them, because they have no earthly names. They only have heavenly ones. And she went home, talked to her husband, and they did that. They actually named them, said goodbye to them, and the whole weight just lifted off her. She's never had any issue since. So some of these things are quite strange, but God knows what He's doing, and they're things which can be used quite powerfully, because that was something which for me was a really precious encounter, but for my daughter it just set her free from the feelings of what she was feeling at the time, because she'd never emotionally dealt with anything like that. She just got on with it, and then all of a sudden all the emotions began to surface, but she didn't know how to understand them or relate to them. So by Jesus giving me that sort of heavenly encounter, then that really was just what God wanted me to share with her, which opened up the door for that. So there have been other encounters with some. Sometimes it's like people don't seem to have a problem so much with the Old Testament saints, because they see, well, they all came back to life and then they went back into heaven with Jesus. It's the New Testament ones that people have more of a problem relating to, because they think, well, they're dead people, and the reality is they never died. Their physical body died, but their actual spirit continued immediately. Paul said, we're absent from the body, but we're present with the Lord, and they have a major role to play in engaging with us. And
Mike?
Yeah.
One question before you move on from that.
I love that.
Sure.
Why do you think it was important that they have earthly names?
Because that was what my daughter, they needed to name them so that they could have closure and recognize that they still were real, rather than they were just non-existent in that sense. And so by actually giving them names, that gave them a closure. They could then say goodbye, but also recognizing that they were still living in the realm of heaven. And so it was just something that I've also shared that with others who've also done that, who, because they've realized that's what takes place, they've then done the same with their children of miscarriages or children who, in that way. And there's a major area in the whole area of abortion as well, where many ladies who've had abortions then really struggle with the spiritual dynamic of that afterwards. And then this, again, gives them a sense of closure, recognizing that there is still an eternal destiny for those children, and although their earthly destiny wasn't able to be fulfilled, their eternal destiny, the angels are bringing them up to speed and preparing them for what is coming eternally. So, yeah, I mean, it's it was a very precious time.
I had a sort of a similar, I guess, maybe one. God had showed me, he just told me that he took me to this pool and he told me, and when I asked what it was, there were children playing in the pool. And when I asked what this pool was, he said that it was a pool of tears. But the children were just laughing and playing and splashing. And there was this one young child who just kind of stood out to me. And when I asked who this one was, it was my son's aborted child from, gosh, 20 some years ago.
Yeah.
And I just thought that the strangest thing. But God bottles our tears, but in a pool, that just kind of shocked me.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, some of the symbolic nature of that is a representation of the tears that we shed here, which God recognizes there, and actually they're not sadness there. So
Yeah, it was no sadness at
a
that
sense of
pool.
joy there. And a lot of the things, it's like the sadness that we feel here, when we learn to engage there, is a different dimensional understanding of how we can continue to engage. And I have had a number of ongoing, and I've talked to a number of people also who have engaged with some of the men in white linen who are from, let's say, the post church age, in the sense, from not the Old Testament but the New Testament, and they very much have a lot to engage with us. They're there to help and support, and they continue to fulfill their destiny there because they are still part of the church, and the church still has its role to play in bringing the restoration of all things. And so as we begin to engage, we find that cloud of witness is there to help and support and to be part of the process. They're not lost and separated. They're still very much part of the process of the church bringing the restoration of all things and to restore the earth to original condition. They just have greater access now. There is no way Bob Jones would have ever turned up in one of our meetings physically, but 2 days, I think 3 days after he died, he turned up.
Wow.
And it was a sense of wow, and he was glowing and radiant and carried this torch, which has been really significant, and having shared that, a number of people engaged at the time, but having shared it afterwards, the significance of that became really clear for us and what we're called to do. And I think once the initial sadness of loss is overcome, then realizing that actually it is not the end, but an ongoing connection and relationship is something which can bring comfort and engagement. And also realizing that the ongoing support of those that have gone before us is important to us, because they have access to things that we don't, in one sense. And I think there's a lot more we need to learn and more we need to understand about it. But my first reaction, in this situation, and I wouldn't do it unless I really felt to do it, was to go and find out, and in a situation, in any situation, if I was asked to pray for someone or to raise someone from the dead, I wouldn't just go and do it. I would go and find out, do they want to come back, for a start, and then what is their ongoing role and function, and in this situation, I think God has been preparing and was preparing, and therefore it was just a joy to be able to help in participating in that, and it's not something I've ever felt led to do before, but I just felt my spirit just say, look, you need to engage, and there was such a radiance that was the thing that struck me the most. There was they don't just carry an image, they carry a fragrance and a frequency and emotions, and it's almost like gifts and callings, and the very nature of a person is felt. And so, I mean, I felt this sort of generous, glowing, radiant heart. That's what I felt, and it was it was a very very intense experience. But I think going forward, we can help many people facing similar issues when we know that we can actually practically engage and offer them genuine comfort rather than, well, okay, we're not really sure but actually, no, there is genuine comfort in knowing and seeing and engaging. A friend of mine, in the other Washington group, shared an experience, in fact, last week, where 2 weeks ago I think it was, where she was involved in praying for somebody. She was asked to pray for someone who had died, and while that she was there, heaven opened and she was able to engage them. And it was just a really powerful experience that she had, because it opened up a different dimension to what you can do when you engage these situations. So yeah, I mean, it's certainly they're challenging emotionally, but now we have access in a spiritual way. It changes our perspective on things, I think. So, yeah.
Well, I saw Lori twice, and even before she passed away, I kept seeing her with the strength of a lion, and so on Sunday, when we were at church, I saw her again just in the front of the room that looked like a lion that was laying down in content, and I was like, that, because that's how I see her. In the strength is, she's got this incredible, the strength of a lion. And then the second thing I saw was triggered by something that you had said, Mike, was standing at the mouth of the lion. Like, I saw this huge lion's mouth that was open, and with Lori standing there, like the power of her testimony was just going out like the roar of a lion, and so I saw differently than the things that you saw.
Yeah. Well, I think that's also a really interesting thing, because we do see from a prophetic perspective, or we see from the perspective that God wants us to gain the revelation from. And so the symbolism of the things we see are reflected in those type of experiences that you share, because that adds an aspect of understanding to something that you wouldn't necessarily gain by just seeing the person. So you're seeing a reflected image of the person's character, nature, calling now, in that there is greater dimension of authority and power in the kingly function of the lion, which is now being expressed. And the whole thing with the lion also, it's like she will also have gone through the judgment seat and have her scroll completely purified with fire, and the destiny that is yet to be fulfilled will now be released into a different dimension. But that destiny still gets to be fulfilled, just from that dimension into this one, rather than from this dimension alone, which is great. I mean, yeah.
Well, it helps to see, thinking of me and just the hope of the things that I have in my heart about what's to happen on Earth and how I affect the Earth and the people that I'm directly affecting now and mentoring with and mentoring to. That it just makes me so happy. Like it all makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it sort of shows that as it is in heaven, your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. It just shows how powerful that dimension is and how important it is that we engage in the realms of heaven, so we can interact with not just the men in white linen, but the seven spirits of God, with wisdom, with prudence, with some of the angelic chancellors and others who are all there to help us rule. And some of the amazing creatures in heaven, and some of the high chancellors, and they're effectively, we were made a little lower than God and higher than the angels. And so they're there as ministering spirits on behalf of those who will inherit salvation. And it's amazing to think that they're there to serve us in fulfilling our ministry, to bring an overlap of heaven to earth and to bring that transformation to this realm, into the realm of heaven. And the more I engage, the more I find that a lot of them are doing roles waiting for us to mature, to then take on those roles. And so they're looking for maturity in the sons of God to begin to administrate the things of heaven as well as the things of earth. And they will be there to help and to guide. But most of the time at the moment, they're doing all the work, because we've not matured and come to that point of where we are operating in dual realms and where we're functioning in the realms of heaven, as well as we are on the realms of earth. And I think going forward, we're going to find a whole host of revelation that unlocks, that shows us where we should be functioning, and some of our heavenly functions that we've been called to have. Some of the things that God has given me and shown me, I just wouldn't have even imagined even 12 months ago, simply because it wasn't in my expectation that I could have a heavenly function. I could see that, yes, I could administer to the earth, but actually, okay, so some of us are supposed to function in some of the courts in heaven. Well, then when you think of Zechariah 3, we're supposed to have charge of his courts. It makes sense. I didn't just see it as, oh, actually, yes, we're supposed to have charge of his courts. We're supposed to administrate those courts. And yes, at the moment, we're just sort of learning the protocol of those courts and how they function and what goes on there, so that we can actually have charge of those courts. And the angels and some of those angelic beings are there to serve us in enabling us. Hence the seven spirits of God, their function in helping us understand our position of government and our mandate for government, and all the understanding for government is so that we would come into the fullness of sonship. So that we can, yes, be manifested on earth, but manifested also in heaven as well. And that, that's a whole dimension that God is beginning to, I think, to open up and reveal, which is interesting to say the least. My experience of it have been quite interesting, but I found, I was talking to someone on Thursday who had been, she said, well, I went to this place and this is what happened there, and suddenly came to me, that was one of the High Chancellor's houses, and it was the house of the affairs of nations. And so, I've seen the High Chancellor's houses. There's 12 of them. I've engaged with each of the 12 High Chancellors. I know their names. I've been to 2 or 3 where I've functioned and done some things there, but I now need to explore the rest of that and how that relates to opening up those houses for revelation into our day. And people are asking, yeah.
I have a question, because I really need to, when you say chancellor, in my brain I go, what is that? Because is that like a European word for something that I'm not getting, you know, like the
Yeah.
chancellors? So what, connect my brain to this little thing and it will probably open up a bunch of stuff.
Okay. Well, we have a Chancellor of the Exchequer in our governmental system, and they are second in command to the Prime Minister. You probably have sort of secretaries of, you know, you call them secretaries, I guess.
Okay,
Yeah, whereas
that helps.
for us, a secretary would be someone who writes notes and looks after somebody. You know what I mean? There's just difference in language. We're chancellors now in Germany. Their premier is called chancellor. So a chancellor is a high official in government. That's what a chancellor is. It's someone who has a high governmental level of authority. And so these 12 chancellors' houses, they have a high level of governmental authority within the realms of heaven, because there are chancellors and there are high chancellors. There's a chancellor's court where we go and get authorization of judicial process and scrolls and mandates. And so, yeah, that's really the function of it. But they hold quite a high office, and there are different levels of that governmental office. But they, you know, I've been given a chancellor's seal by wisdom, and a staff also that I can use the seal as like a headpiece on this staff, and I've used it to gain access to Satan's trophy room a number of times. And yeah, now some of what God is calling me to do is to use that chancellor's authority to be able to invest others with authority and to release people into their dimensions of authority. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm any different than anybody else. It just means that I've matured to a level where I'm receiving some of those things. My desire is to bring everyone to a place where everyone gets the fullness of what God has called them to have. And we all have roles and callings to work. And I guess some of our spheres of government may be different in this realm particularly, but all of us are called to administer heaven and to have charge of the courts. It's not just for one or two people. There are different courts and different levels of courts potentially, but actually we're all called to be able to engage. I guess some people just get to go first and pave a way, which is what Ian is doing in Chayton and others. They're just beginning to pave a way so that others can follow on easier behind. I've got a task to go and explore these 12 houses and find the protocol of those houses, and then see how that works with the courts of the Council of the Fathers and the 12 laws that come out of Zion, the 12 laws that come out of Jerusalem. And I'm like, oh, how do I do all that? Well, I have to do it. I just sort of like, oh, okay. I just take some of that around the ark of the presence of God, and I begin to cultivate desire for it. And you can't do it all in one go. I've got so much stuff I'm doing. It has to be as my spirit draws me towards it. And actually, even this morning, my spirit was drawing me towards preparing to be able to engage in some of these things. So you get forerunner experiences that God gives you, and then He's looking for you then to begin to cultivate the desire within your spirit and your heart to then pursue those experiences and outwork them. And it doesn't happen all in one go. That's why journaling things is really important. When you journal them, you can then go back into them, and your spirit can re-engage with them. So I know, over the coming few months, I'm going to need to engage because my spirit is now drawing me to that. And so I will cultivate it around the ark. I'll begin to look into God's purposes for it. And then I can step into that, and I can go back and engage some of those places out of the desire which has been created. And I got some of that when I was standing on the Firestones and looking into deeper levels of government, because it's about the Firestones were what Satan walked on, and he looked into those Firestones and he saw God's desire for man to rule earth and heaven with him. And Satan was not impressed by the fact that man was going to rule his spiritual domain, being the highest of the created beings, and he rebelled. You know, and so when we get to go look back into the Firestones, we start to look into God's governmental purpose for mankind. And there are different levels of that. I've gone down into 3 levels of it. My spirit has absorbed more than my mind can contain, but my spirit then releases certain things, and then I begin to catch up with understanding, and then I begin to look to engage in those things. And I'm sort of just beginning to cultivate that desire right now and spend more time meditating around it and looking into it from what was. Because once you engage the ark and you can look into what was, which was what God's intention was in eternity, you can then begin to bring what was into what is, so it will change what will be. Because history is not written yet. We get to write history. And therefore we can get to administrate from a prophetic perspective what will be, but not out of what we want it to be, but out of what it was within the heart of God in eternity. And looking into what it looked like before there was sin, because of course, you know, the Lamb was slain before the foundation of the world, so that we can look into that without the restrictions of sin and see God's fullness of what it should look like. And then that gives us something to begin to call forth and administrate to bring that into my life today. What does my life look like today from the perspective of eternity rather than from the perspective of my history? Because I need to become, as an order of Melchizedek, one without genealogy, because my destiny and eternal destiny should shape who I am, not my experiences in this life. And so I need to be and not just this life, but also the life of my parents and their parents and back into generations. I do not want to be shaped by that genealogy. I want to be shaped by the thoughts of God and how God created me to be. So I need to be transformed so that I can be like the order of Melchizedek, who had no genealogy. And so for all of us, if we embrace transformation genetically and in those areas, we can be without genealogy and be like Jesus, who was after the order of Melchizedek, and be transformed into his image and begin to radiate glory here. You know, you see Moses and Elijah, you know, they radiated glory as well as Jesus on the mountain of transfiguration. And one of them represented one who had passed into the heavens and had not physically died, and the other one represented one who had. And they represent the apostolic and the prophetic orders that when you bring that together, it brings full government onto the earth. So there's lots of things that God is starting to reveal, you know, about the realms of heaven and how we can engage in it, which is an exciting journey. You know, it really is. So yeah, I don't know if you got anything else you want to talk about today.
I do, and it's coming back to faith, and that because I was, you know, engaging wisdom and counsel and knowledge, and but we really haven't talked about faith. So I'm going to describe what happened and ask you to expand on that. So I was in the operating room with, you know, praying over Lori and in my spirit, and I was like, gosh, I need faith. I need faith to be more than what I have right now. And the best I can describe is that this the person of faith, I'll call it that, the substance of faith, was almost like a super round, those super bouncy balls, and I was in like a racquetball courtroom where you just throw this ball, it's ding, 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 ding. It was going everywhere, and I was like, what the heck is this? Why is there so much energy just bouncing around? And I go, it felt like a atom that was split or going crazy. And so then this picture took me to the quantum physics level, because Faith was waiting for me to make a decision so that he could be still. Like Faith was bouncing around until I was able to make a decision, and then Faith became still and strong and landed exactly where I needed it to be, and that was pretty interesting. But at least my perspective of how important the choice was really in me to have Faith be where I needed it to be. It was interesting. So I wanted to just, because I looked in Strong Concordance today, and in the Old Testament it's only referred to twice, in Deuteronomy and Hosea, and then like a billion times in the New Testament. Like Faith is really interesting, but it's such a huge part in everything that we do.
Oh, it is, absolutely, yeah. I mean, when my first encounter with the Firestones, which was my first heavenly encounter, in fact, I looked into the sort of subatomic structure. It was almost like looking into this swirling mass of moving things, and I looked like into the steps, and as I looked into the steps, the risers of the steps, they were swirling, and I knew that they were swirling with grace and faith. And so grace and faith are the two keys when it comes to manifesting the spiritual blessings that are in the spiritual realms into the natural realm. And you're absolutely right, the quantum understanding, nothing actually is solid matter until it is observed. And so we observe it, and it becomes solid. And faith is the substance of things we hope for. So hope is what we engage, and we see that, so we observe it as hope. Now, hope is not a wish. Hope is a expectation, a white-hot expectation of this is the reality of God's will. But then, as we view it and observe it, the potential that's contained within it is manifested as that substance of actual manifestation. So, the bouncing around, indicates the power and the energy, the potential energy. Because how does energy get into that ball? Someone has to impart energy to throw it or hit it. And then it contains that energy, and then that energy is released to make it bounce off different walls. And it's the same with faith. It contains the potential which needs to be released. And so our observation of it brings the reality of that into manifestation. And when I, again, in a heavenly encounter, God showed me the whole quantum physics lesson and quantum physics and how it worked. And he talked about string theory and the theory of everything, in which his voice is the vibrating frequency that's contained within the substance of everything. So take the smallest particle, and within that there is a vibrating string of energy, which is the resonant frequency of his voice, which is still vibrating from creation. When creation was roared into being, that the voice of God is still vibrating within the matter of everything. And in fact, it says that this whole dimension is held together by the voice of his power. And so he described that as grace, the divine potential within everything, which is his grace. And when I began to ask questions, or when Jesus said to me, what do you want to know? I asked him how he did certain miracles. And he showed me from the quantum physics perspective. So how did he walk on water? Well, he walked on water because he applied faith, so his belief, and that mixed with the reality of the grace which was in the water vibrating, and he was able to then speed up the vibration frequency of the water so it became solid. And so because it says in Ephesians 4:6 that God is in and through and above everything, we can connect up with the potential grace which is available in everything that's been created, and connect to it and begin to control it, if you like. And so when I asked him how he did certain things, he explained it in that way. And then I said, well, how do I function in that? Because I asked him, well, how did you walk through people? So he said that he was able to control or effect government over the frequency of his body, so the vibrating energy within his body, and begin to align all his cells, his atoms, to the frequency of the spiritual realm and step into it bodily, and then step back out of it. So, you know, again, we're only local when we are observed. So if we can change the frequency that we are vibrating at, we can become local to the quantum or the spiritual realm rather than the physical one. So like we step out of phase with this realm and step into phase with the spiritual realm, and we can come back out. Now, quantum physics describes that as quantum tunneling, in that quantum particles should not be able to go through a lead screen, but they do. So they go out into the quantum realm and come back into the physical realm on the other side of the lead screen, some of them. And that's exactly what Jesus did. And so if we needed to put our, let's say, our hand through a solid wall, then all we have to do is, we have to have faith. So we have to have heard God say that we can do that and authorize us to do it. And then we can mix that with the grace that's operating within our hand and actually align it with the frequency of the wall. And so then it can pass into it because it's vibrating at the same frequency. The same thing when we go to minister healing to people. We have a faith gate, we have a hope gate. When we apply, let's say, the word of God that says you can lay hands on the sick and see them recover, through that faith gate, and we begin to see ourselves doing it, then literally the grace that's available in our hands, vibrating, we mix that with the faith of the words that come through our faith gate, and literally anointing gets formed. And when we lay hands on people, often people feel heat or vibration or electricity. That literally is the charge of anointing that comes through grace and faith mixing to produce an anointing to release that manifestation on earth. And so the same thing goes when we speak. We can speak with a frequency of our voice that contains the power, the potential within the words, and speak into someone's DNA and actually transform their DNA by the same thing, faith and grace coming out of our mouth as an energy created in our words. Now, you know, we're just learning some of these things. New Age people have been doing this for a long time. They just jumped on it, where we were warned off all this stuff by religious people that says you can't do any of these things. Now we're having to play catch up. And so we're now having to reclaim back the ground that has been stolen and robbed through the counterfeits, through what are real, through the things that Jesus did, through the things he demonstrated. Now we need to catch up and learn how to do it. Now some people just do things. I want to know how things are done, and so Jesus wanted me to know how things are done so I can explain it to people. You know, so that when I pray for people, I direct my words and the frequency that they're vibrating at to effect change and to realign people's organs to frequency that they're supposed to carry. You can do the same thing with healing oils that carry a high level of frequency that bring a realignment of things back into order. And in fact, the whole of creation is groaning at a frequency which is B flat, I think so many 200 odd octaves lower than the lowest keyboard B flat. And we are supposed to realign creation back into its correct frequency. So to realign it with the frequency of heaven, which is when we'll start to see terraforming and heaven manifesting on earth, because we will begin to realign things that way. So faith, grace, they work together, and it is like a potential energy. We just have to direct that energy in the right place, because there's no point it bouncing all over the place. We need it, as you say, to land, and then we can then begin to administrate it, because we carry the authority and the power that it releases, and we will start to see more and more of these things, you know. And these little illustrations are really important because they help. There are modern day parables. You know, Jesus was not going to tell a parable of faith being a ball bouncing around a racquetball court, because it didn't exist. He wasn't going to tell a parable about quantum physics and 0-point energy because the knowledge of it didn't exist. But now it does. Now we get more modern day parables that enable us to explain things in ways which now people can understand today. You know, so you know, your racquetball and ball is a parable for today's audience of describing how faith works. You know, so it's great. It's good.
But the grace is a huge key to that, and it makes so much sense. So thank you for putting those together for me.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get this stuff at first, but in some of my engagements in heaven, I went into a pool and a river where there was grace and faith were swirling in this river, flowing, and I'm sort of feeling the energy of it, but not quite understanding the significance of it. But the more I sort of pursued, what does this mean? Why are you bringing me to this river? Why am I feeling and sensing this? What's going on? The more I began to understand the power there is in understanding how faith and grace work. You know, and of course, grace has been reduced in the religious thing to, oh, well, Christ, you know, God's redemption at Christ. It's just an acronym for something which removes all its real power. You know, there is such enormous potential energy in grace, ready for faith to interact with it to bring manifestation of the substance into reality. You know, and that means we will be able to manifest things out of that realm into this realm. You know, where did the coin come from that was in the fish's mouth? You know, did it fall out of some fisherman's pocket and the fish swallowed it? Or did Jesus speak it into existence? You know, and we need to learn how to speak things into existence the way he did, because he understood how to do it. You know, so it's good stuff. Yeah, excellent.
You wet.
Okay. All right. Okay, well, let's